If you've been wondering how to set up back button focus in your Fujifilm camera, or this is the first time you're hearing about it and you're wondering what it is, we're going to spend the next few minutes covering that. This is just one of the many focus techniques that you'll learn in the Fujifilm Camera Fundamentals course, which you'll find at photocourses.link/FCF. And the reason that a lot of photographers love using this technique is because it separates the autofocus command from the shutter button. With the traditional camera setup, the shutter button does two things. First, it commands autofocus, and then it creates the exposure. It takes the picture. Now, there's a school of thought out there that these two actions should be completely separate from one another. You shouldn't have to go through the step of commanding autofocus before you want to create an exposure. What happens if you struggled getting that autofocus lock in the first place? Like it was dark, or your subject didn't have a lot of contrast. And I mean, let's be honest, the Fujifilm autofocus system isn't known for its blazing fast focus speeds. So there may be times where you only want to command autofocus once, get that lock, confirm that lock, and then you can start taking a bunch of pictures without having to get that lock, go through that entire drill every single time. So with this setup, the autofocus command is a completely separate step, a completely separate button, hence the back button focus. The button on the back of the camera labeled either AF on or AFL, depending on the camera. You're going to push that to command autofocus. And then when you're ready to create the picture, then you'll do that using the shutter button. Now, there are two steps to doing this. I like to kind of separate the two. And the first step is to detach the autofocus command from the shutter button. You'll do this in the button dial setting. So go to the menu, Setup, Button Dial Setting, and then go to Shutter AF. When you get into Shutter AF, you're going to turn this off for either single shot autofocus or continuous autofocus, or both. That's just going to depend on your style and your needs. If you want to be able to use the half press on the shutter button while you're in continuous autofocus, you can just keep your finger there and take the burst of photos as it's continuously focusing. You can leave this on for continuous autofocus, but if you want to use a separate button to focus when you're in single shot autofocus, then you can turn it off for AFS. And then the second step is to enable the back button for autofocus. In nearly all recent Fujifilm cameras, this is already enabled by default. So you can press and hold the display back button when you're in shooting mode, and it'll take you to this function setting screen that shows you how all of your controls are mapped out. You'll find the button labeled either AF on or AFL, AEL, some variation of that. Press OK, and then scroll through the list looking for AF on if it's not already there. You don't want to get confused by selecting AF lock or AE lock or AE-AF lock. What you're looking for is AF on. That is going to be the function that commands autofocus when you press that button. Now, you don't need to use this specific button. You can actually use any other button on the camera that you want to use to command autofocus, just following the same steps. And that's really all there is for setting up back button focus. It's quite simple. Using it, however, is, I don't want to say difficult, I don't want to discourage you from it, but there are some gotchas. In fact, just one big gotcha, and that's that you have to practice. Because if all you've been doing up to this point is pressing the shutter button halfway to command autofocus, you wait for those squares to turn green, and then you press the shutter all the way to take the picture, you're gonna forget that you need to press a button on the back of the camera first to command autofocus. And then when that lock is verified, then you can press the shutter button. So that is going to take some practice. You are going to miss some photos right away, which is why you have to practice. You don't want to be missing those photos during game time because you haven't practiced before the game, to use a sports metaphor. You just select your focus mode as you normally do. If you're in AFS, you push this button until that square turns green. and then you can release that back button and start taking pictures. You don't need to command autofocus again unless you change your focal length, your aperture, you change your focus distance to the subject. As long as all that stuff stays the same, you don't need to focus again. If you're in AFC, you will need to hold that button down for as long as you want to command autofocus. Hold it down with your thumb. The camera will be continuously updating that focus. And then with your index finger, you can just take those pictures whenever the moment's right. There's one other kind of little secret back button focus feature in Fujifilm cameras, and that's that you can also use this button while you're in manual focus mode. You can command autofocus while keeping the camera in manual focus mode. To set that up, go to your AF/MF setting menu and look for Instant AF setting. Set that to either AFS or AFC, which will dictate how autofocus behaves when you press that button while in manual focus mode. You can be in manual focus mode and use the button for single shot autofocus or continuous autofocus. You set that here. So that's the quick overview of what back button focus is and how to set it up and use it in Fujifilm cameras. It's really quite simple once you practice it. And like I said, that's just one of the many focus techniques that you'll learn in the Fujifilm Camera Fundamentals course. There are a bunch of free previews you can check out, and then you can save 20% with the coupon code TUBE20. If you have any other questions or comments, please let me know. If there's any other topics that you want to learn about Fujifilm cameras, again, just let me know and I'll see if I can turn that into a video here for you. Subscribe for more great tips like this every week, and we'll see you again in the next video. Thanks for watching.